Hello everyone and welcome here. Today I'm going to be showing you how to make a hexagon granny cardigan. As you may know if you've been following me for a while, I have already made a tutorial for one of these and I will show it up here on screen and I will link it down below in the description box. But I have had a lot of comments since coming out with that pattern of people asking if there's a way to make it crop, if there's a cropped version. So that's what today's video will be. So if you're looking for a cropped granny hexagon cardigan, then this is just the tutorial for you. If you know how to make granny squares, this will make this tutorial very easy, but if you don't, it is still a very simple tutorial to follow. And all that you need is some yarn. You can use any weight yarn. I'm using a 3, but for my previous granny hexagon cardigan, I used a weight 4. You can use something thinner or thicker. It really doesn't matter. And then you're going to need some scissors, and I am using a 4.5 millimeter hook for this project, but you can use any hook, it doesn't matter. Just any hook you want and any yarn you want will work for this. There's no specific gauge that you have to follow. And you'll need a darning needle for weaving in your ends. I just don't have mine with me right now. So without further ado, let's get into this video. To start, I am going to make a magic ring. I will have a tutorial linked down below on how to do a magic ring. So create your magic ring. And if you will be using a chain 3 at the beginning of each round, that chain 3 will always count as a stitch. So to start off, you can chain 3, that works fine. But to make my work a little cleaner, I'm going to stack 2 single crochets on top of each other to make it the same height as a double crochet. So you can just chain 3 or work single crochet. And you can see right here there's 2 bars. In the left bar only, we're going to insert our hook and work another single crochet. So now this is the height of a double crochet, and it's just going to make your work look a lot cleaner every time you join the round. But again, you do not have to do this. It is not required. So that's our first double crochet. And to create the first cluster, we're going to be working in clusters. And each cluster has 3 double crochets. So that's your first double crochet. We're going to work another double crochet. And another double crochet. So that's our first double crochet cluster, and we need 5 more of these clusters. So moving on to the next cluster, we're going to chain 3 and work another double crochet cluster. So that's 3 double crochets. So now we have 2 clusters. Chain 3 to move on to the next cluster. Work 3 double crochets. And just keep repeating that until you have 6 double crochet clusters total. After you have all 6 of your double crochet clusters, we're going to close up that ring and we're going to work our last 3 chains, and then we're going to slip stitch into the first stitch of the round. So besides slip stitching into the first stitch of every round, we will not be working in stitches. We will only be working in these chain spaces. So besides the slip stitch at the beginning of every round, you will not be working in any stitches, but only chain spaces. that's it for round 1. For round 2, we're going to either do your chain 3, or you can stack 2 single crochets on top of each other. Do that by working a single crochet, and in the left bar, insert your hook and work another single crochet on top. And then I'm gonna work 2 more double crochets for my cluster, and that's my first cluster of round 2. Okay, each one of these chain spaces at the beginning are all corners. So every time you come to a corner, you need to work 2 clusters into that corner to help increase your hexagon. So that is my first cluster. I'm going to chain 3 and work 3 more double crochets into that chain space. And that's it for my first double crochet cluster corner. Now it's time to work into the next corner. So we're gonna chain 1 to move on to the next corner. And then you just repeat working 2 double crochet clusters separated by a chain 3. And that chain 3 makes a corner. And we finished that corner. So now we're gonna move on to the next. I'm gonna chain 1 to move on to the next. And then again, work 2 more double crochet clusters separated by a chain 3 in this corner as well. And that's what it should be looking like. And just repeat that into the last 3 corners. So you chain 1 to move on to the next corner, work 2 double crochet clusters separated by a chain 3, chain 1 to move on to the next, and repeat until the end of the round. Okay, I just finished my last corner, and to join our work, we're of course going to chain 1 to move on to the next cluster, and then we're going to slip stitch in the first stitch to join. And this is how it should be looking. Your hexagon will be lumpy and everything, and that is perfectly normal. It's not going to matter later. So don't worry if your hexagon starts like bunching up and whatnot. So for round 3, turn your work and either chain 3 or stack the single crochets on top of each other. And then work a normal cluster. Now this cluster, you only work 1 cluster into the edges of your work, and you work 2 clusters into the corners of your work. So this is just an edge, this is an edge, this is an edge, but the ones with points are your corners. So I only need 1 cluster here on the edge, and to move on to the next chain space, I'm going to work my 2 clusters separated by a chain 3. And to move on to the next chain space, I'm just going to chain 1. And since this is not a corner, I'm just going to work 1 double crochet cluster into this chain space. And then you're just going to repeat that. So to move on to the next chain space, you chain 1, and then when you come to a corner, you work 2 double crochet clusters separated by a chain 3, chain 1 to move on to the next chain space, and when you're in an edge, you just work 1 double crochet cluster. I finished working in all my chain spaces, so now I'm just gonna chain 1 and join my work by slip stitching into the first stitch of the round. Okay, for round 4, again, chain 3 or use the stacked single crochet method. And then just work 2 more double crochets to finish off that cluster. And we're just going to repeat doing what we have been doing. So chain 1 to move on to the next chain space. And since this is a corner, we're going to work 1 more double crochet cluster separated by a chain 3. And across the edge, we're just going to work 1 cluster into each of these chain spaces. And when we come to the corner, we're going to work 2 double crochet clusters separated by a chain 3. So you're just going to repeat that. In every edge, work only 1 cluster, in every corner, work 2. I just worked my slip stitch into the first stitch of the round, and now to continue growing your hexagon, you will just be repeating the same process of working 1 double crochet cluster into every chain space on the edge, and then working 2 double crochet clusters separated by a chain 3 in all of the corners. And before you move on to another set of clusters, you will always separate that by a chain 1 in between. So I am going to be working 17 rounds total, but that may be more or less for you depending on the size that you're making. But what I recommend is you working as many rounds until you have the right cropped length. Now, when you have it cropped to the length that you want, your sleeves won't be long enough, and that's okay. We're just going to add on to that length later. And also, when you come to a cropped length that you like, don't worry if the surface area around your chest isn't very covered, because I'll show you how to fix that too. I now have my 17 rounds, and it is the perfect cropped length for me. If you're unsure whether it's a good length and fit for you, what I do, and I'll insert a clip here, I get stitch markers, I add them across the top to connect this top of the sleeve, and then try it on and find out if I need more or less rounds. So you can do that before sewing up the top. But as I said, these 17 rounds are good for me. So now I'm just going to seam the top here. You can seam this piece together however you want. I'm going to be single crocheting it together, but if you want to use a darning needle and some yarn, you can totally do that. Okay, to seam the top of it together, if you're wanting to use single crochet, is you're going to start by making a slip knot and then grabbing the corners of your work, you're going to pull it through, and then I'm just going to work single crochets through both pieces to join them. So in this corner, I'm going to work my first single crochet, and then I'm going to come to the clusters. So I'm just going to insert my hook through both sides, pick up a loop, and then work a single crochet. And when you come to the chain spaces, just work a single crochet through the chain space. And it's as simple as that. So I'm just going to continue single crocheting in every stitch and chain space until the end of this row. Okay, I just finished seaming both sides of the cardigan together. Now I'm just gonna fasten off. And then, so this seam won't show on the outside, we're just gonna flip it outside in, and then it's pretty like invisible. You can't really see it from the outside. Okay, now you can move on to the sleeve portion of this video if you don't mind so much if your cardigan doesn't cover as much surface area as you want. So if you want it more of an open cardigan or don't care for it to cover more on the front side, then you can just skip on to the sleeve portion. I'll have timestamps down below so you can do that. But for me, I want it just a little bit wider. So how we're going to do that is we're going to attach our yarn and work the granny stitch around the front and back of the cardigan. So this is the front and back, this is the sleeve. And so I'm going to attach my yarn here at this corner, and then going to work all the way around to the next corner, turn my work back around, and turn my work and work back around. So it's very simple. I'm going to work a total of 3 extra rows, but again, you don't have to work any rows at all, or you can work more if you need more. It all depends on whatever you want for your personal cardigan. So as we connected our yarn last time, we're just going to make a slip knot, and we're not seaming these sides together, so we're only working in 1/2, and then you're just going to work 1 double crochet cluster into each chain space. So that's our first double crochet cluster, and then you're just going to work 1 cluster into each chain space. And I'll show you what we do when we come to the top, like shoulder part of the cardigan where you seamed it together. It's very simple. So work 1 double crochet cluster into each chain space until you come to the top shoulder part. Also, I don't think I mentioned, but you are still separating each double crochet cluster with a chain 1. So always make sure before you move on to the next chain space to chain 1 before you work your next cluster. I came to the top slash shoulder part, and these 2 chain spaces we're going to make into 1. So how you'll do that is you'll work 1 double crochet into the first chain space, and then we're going to double crochet 2 together. So you're going to start making a double crochet, go through the first 2 loops and stop, and then you're going to yarn over again and insert into the next chain space, pick up a loop, yarn over, go through 2, and yarn over and go through 3. So we just connected these 2 chain spaces, and then you're just going to work a normal double crochet. And since we double crocheted the 2 in the middle together, we still only have 3 stitches on top. So now you're just going to chain one and then work into the next chain space. So just continue working the clusters like you have been doing until the end of the row. Okay, to move on to the next row, we are going to work 1 double crochet or a chain 3 for our first stitch, which mine technically isn't a double crochet, it's 2 single crochets stacked on top of each other, but that counts as your first double crochet or your first stitch. And then we're going to chain 1 and work a cluster into the next chain space. So that helps keep the flow of our corner. And when you come to the edge of the next one, you're just going to work 1 double crochet into the very last stitch in the cluster of the previous row. So just continue to work your clusters the same as you have been, and when you come to the shoulder part, it will be seamless. You just work into the chain spaces as normal. Like I just said, I worked my last cluster, and in the very last stitch of the cluster from the previous row, I'm just going to work a normal double crochet. I'm going to work 1 more row, but you can work as many or as few as you want, and then I'll see you after I finish. Okay, I just finished my 3rd and final row for the width, and I'm just gonna fasten off. And now it's a good length and width for me. So I'm going to be working a total of 13 rounds plus a round of the scalloped detailing. But if you're not interested in the scallop detailing, then it would just be I'm working 14 rounds. But mine is 13 rounds plus a scalloped edging round. So to do this, you just do what you have been doing. Since there are no corners, you don't have to worry about that. It's just normal double crochet clusters in the round. And again, 13 rounds may be more or less than you need, so as you go, just try on your cardigan to figure out the perfect length you need for your sleeves. So, like I said, just normal double crochet clusters in each chain space for however many rounds that you need. When you come to the seam of your sleeve where you connected the top of your cardigan together, you're just going to do the same thing as you did when you added width. But if you skip that part, this is how you do it. So you have these 2 chain spaces right next to each other. So you're going to work 1 double crochet into the next chain space, and then you're going to work another double crochet, but only go through 2 loops and stop. And then you're going to work another double crochet into the next chain space, pick up a loop, yarn over, go through 2 loops, yarn over, go through all 3 loops. So you double crocheted 2 together, and then just work 1 more double crochet into that chain space, and now you have a total of 3 double crochets. Now these 2 chain spaces are now 1 chain space. So just continue as normal, working your double crochet clusters. and making sure to turn your work the same way you have been doing at the beginning of every round. Okay, I finished my 13th round. If you do not want the scalloped edging for your cardigan, then just work one extra row of the normal granny stitch. But if you want the scallop stitch, then this is how you do it. So we're going to work one double crochet into this chain space right here. So you can do your chains, or you can stack the single crochets on one another. After that, we're going to chain one, and then in the middle stitch of this cluster, we're going to slip stitch into that. And then we're going to chain one again, and then in the next chain space, we're going to work 3 double crochets. And then we're going to chain one, and then slip stitch into the middle stitch from the cluster below, and then we're going to chain one again. So we're going to repeat that. So in every chain space, you work 3 double crochets like a normal cluster, and then you chain one, and then slip stitch into the middle of the cluster from the previous round, and then chain one, work 3 double crochets into the next, and just continue. So I'll show you that a few more times. So I just chained one. Now I'm going to work 3 double crochets into the next chain space, and then I'm going to chain one. I'm going to slip stitch into the middle stitch in the cluster from the previous round, and then chain one again, and then work 3 double crochets. Chain one, slip stitch into that middle stitch, chain one, work 3 double crochets, chain one, slip stitch, chain one. And then you'll be adding the sweet scalloped edging to the end of your sleeve. So just complete that until the end of the round. And when you come around to this one, the very first one you made, you just work 2 more double crochets into that, and then slip stitch into this very first double crochet. I'll show you when I come around. Okay, I've come to my last chain space, and here's the double crochet from the beginning of the round. So now I know I just need to work 2 more double crochets, and then I'm just going to slip stitch into that first stitch. And that is it for that scalloped edging. So fasten off. And it should look something like this. Now you just repeat this entire process for the other side of your cardigan. And then when you're done with that, I'll show you how I connect them. Okay, for seaming these 2 parts of the cardigan together, you're only going to be seaming the back together. And I'm going to start connecting them maybe like 3 inches from the top. So the top would be where your seam for the shoulders is, and you can start at the top, that's perfectly fine, but I like the way it fits better when I start a little lower. So probably about 3 inches from the top, and then I'm just going to seam it all the way to the bottom. And I'm going to be using the same method as I have been with just the single crochet seaming. So I finished seaming the back side of my cardigan together, and now it is all one piece. I ended up measuring right here. It was more so about 2 inches away from the top, but you can do less or more. It really doesn't matter. If you want to seam it all the way up, you can. If you want to start a little lower, but I just feel like if you don't sew it all the way to the top, it drapes much better over your shoulders. But again, it's completely up to you. Next, I am going to be adding scalloped edging around all of the edge of my cardigan. So around the bottom, up and around the neck, and down. I'm going to attach my yarn to the back side of my cardigan and then just work the scalloped edging the same way you did for the sleeves. But again, if you want to skip this part, you can if you don't like the scalloped edge look. If you're working the scalloped edging, you can attach your yarn anywhere, but I'm going to attach my yarn right here. Okay, I'll now show you how I do the scalloped and show you around the parts that you may be confused about, like the back, the corners, and around the neck. So this is the bottom, back, middle of the cardigan. We're just going to make a slip knot and then just insert our hook really anywhere in the middle. And I'm going to chain 2. So only around the more difficult parts, like this back, the corners, and around the neck, we're going to chain 2 instead of 1. So chain 2, and then I'm going to work into this next chain space. So work your double crochet cluster, and then chain 1. And this sideways cluster, you're going to work into it the same as a normal cluster. Here's a sideways one, and here's a normal one. We're just going to roughly insert our hook until the middle of it, and then chain 1 and work into the next chain space. And then chain 1, and now they're normal facing clusters. So we're just going to insert our hook in the middle stitch of that cluster, chain 1, then work into the next chain space. So just continue working your scallop edging as you would. After you finish a cluster, you chain 1, slip stitch into the middle stitch of the next cluster, chain 1, and then work your next double crochet cluster. And I'll meet you back when I'm at the corner to show you what to do. Okay, I've come to my first corner. So how we're going to work around it is we're going to chain 2, slip stitch into the corner of the corner, chain 2 again, and then work your double crochet cluster into the next chain space. And that's how your corner should be looking. Now I'll meet you here when I come around the back of the neck. Okay, now I've come to the back of the neck. I'm going to work my normal double crochet cluster right here, chain 2, slip stitch into the middle right here, chain 2, and then work my next double crochet cluster right here. So I'll show you how that looks. And that is how it should look. Now when you come to the next corner, do exactly what you did for the other corner, and then I'll show you how I fasten off at the end. Okay, so like I said earlier, only the back corners and around the neck we're going to chain 2. So I'm chaining 2. So I'm just going to slip stitch where I slip stitched in the first little part here in the middle of the round. And now you can fasten off. Also, this part is optional, but I'm going to add ties onto my cardigan. So you can add them really anywhere you want along the front of the cardigan. I'm going to do it somewhere around the middle of it. So probably around here. And let me show you how to connect your ties. So you're going to make a slip knot. And then I'm going to do it right here. I'm just going to where one of my slip stitches from the previous row was. I'm gonna insert my hook. And now I'm just going to chain as many as I want for my tie. For me, I'm going to chain 75, but you can chain as many or as little as you want. Okay, after you have all your chains, you're just going to start slip stitching into every chain. So starting with the second chain from the hook, you're just going to slip stitch. And you're just going to repeat that until you're at the end of your chain. Now I'm at the end of my chain and I'm just going to slip stitch into the same slip stitch again. So this is where I came out of. I'm just going to insert my hook there. Slip stitch, and now you just fasten off. And that's it for one of the straps. So you're just going to repeat this whole process on the other side, so you'll have 2 ties. Now all you have to do is weave in your ends and then you're done.